Herman Shaw, just short of 90, has lived all his years in Alabama. Today is a momentous one for Shaw and for his friend and neighbor, Charles Pollard. They are headed to Montgomery, the state capital, to be honored guests at a special performance of the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. The play they have come to see, Miss Evers' Boys, is a fictionalized account of a notorious medical experiment known as the Tuskegee Study. In this experiment, government doctors promised black men in Alabama free treatment for syphilis, a disease sometimes called bad blood.
The United States government I'm talking about now, in Washington, is sending down the best medicine to treat anybody in this county who needs it, even if you're poor. If you got bad blood, you're going to get a chance to be treated. Now that's something. That's what I drove here to tell y'all.
How come they never interested before?
Well, they're interested now. Yes,
In fact, the government doctors withheld treatment. They were interested in studying syphilis, not in curing it.
no white man sent me.
I don't think I got bad blood.
Herman Shaw and Carter Howard, Price Johnson and Charles Pollard are survivors of the experiment. But hundreds of lives were gambled, and dozens of lives were lost.
In many ways, these men's lives didn't count. These were poor black sharecroppers in Macon County, Alabama. And they were in many ways expendable.
The Tuskegee study has been grossly misunderstood and misrepresented this way. And the fact was that it was concern for the black community trying to set the stage for the best public health approach possible and best therapy that led to the study being carried out.
What is the truth behind this study? I'm George Strait, and I've come here to Macon County, Alabama, where it all took place, to try to find out. The experiment was called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. It was authorized by the U.S. Public Health Service, paid for with taxpayers' dollars, and conducted by government doctors. Now, the aim was to learn more about how syphilis, this deadly and debilitating disease, actually attacks the body. The method was to withhold treatment from 400 men, all poor, all black, and all deceived by the promise of care. Now, the medical establishment has never denied the facts of this tragedy, which for many has come to symbolize medical misconduct and a disregard for human rights in the name of science. But the question remains, how could this experiment have happened?
You've got to go back, Senator, to appreciate Macon County, Alabama in 1932, to understand what caring meant in those times. You've got to think like we thought then. You're talking about civil rights. I'm talking about people just trying to stay alive.
Macon County, Alabama sits in the heart of the Deep South, and in many ways this is still the Old South. Over 80% of the people who live here are black, and many, like Herman Shaw, are just 2 or 3 generations from slavery. When Shaw was a young man in the 1920s, most black men and women worked the unforgiving fields of Alabama as sharecroppers or tenant farmers for white landowners.
Joe. Come on. Come on, boy. Come on. That's a man. Okay, good boy.
Then, as now, this was a poor county in one of the poorest states in the nation. And as in all poor places, the people here were oppressed by the ravages of ill health.
Macon County was a poor county. There were people there who were sharecroppers. and they could not afford health care. So that you had high incidences of infant mortality, you had high incidences of syphilis, you had high incidences of other diseases. So it was not a very healthy county.
But there was mounting attention to the health needs here.
You see a lot of public health writing at the turn of the century talking about germs know no color line. So that you had to take care of the health needs of black people or they were going to infect white people.
And while there were many health problems facing the citizens of Macon County, in the 1920s and 30s, here and throughout the nation, it was syphilis that aroused people's fears.
It would have been enormously frightening to have the diagnosis of syphilis for really two reasons. One, because of the many symptoms and terrifying consequences that syphilis truly does have. And secondly, because there had been so much attention to syphilis and the creation of what people called syphilophobia. People thought it was everywhere, and people were horrified to learn that they might be infected, and it was so highly stigmatized because of its association with illicit sexual behavior.
Now that the curtain of secrecy has at last been removed, everyone should know the truth about syphilis and gonorrhea. Syphilis is spread by intimate contacts, usually sexual. The cause of syphilis can be seen.
By the 1920s, scientists had established that this tiny organism, a spirochete, can live in the body for years or decades. They knew that syphilis could cause a life sentence of illness, blindness, dementia, heart disease, crippling arthritis, and often premature death. But there were treatments. Toxic arsenic, mercury, and bismuth compounds injected over more than a year would attack the spirochetes. In most cases, the treatments would render the disease non-infectious and prevent its worst damage.
With widespread knowledge and with these weapons, America can conquer syphilis in one generation.
This was a disease that really was the epitome of what modern medicine was about. You could find the cause, you could find out whether somebody was infected, and you could treat them effectively. So this created enormous attention to syphilis in the 1920s and the 1930s because public health officials said, here's a disease that we can really effectively address.
The U.S. Public Health Service was run by idealistic physician scientists. They were eager to use the combined weapons of germ theory, sanitation, basic research, and public education to fight and conquer disease. Syphilis, with more than 300,000 new cases every year, was an early target. As part of this campaign, the Public Health Service launched 6 pilot projects in the South in predominantly poor black communities. These efforts were partially supported by state and philanthropic funds. One project was in Macon County, Alabama. In 1930, government doctors arrived with high hopes and an ambitious plan to diagnose and treat as many as 10,000 people. Effective therapy would require an arduous and sometimes painful course of treatment with toxic compounds administered over a year and a half. Initial blood testing revealed an epidemic rate of syphilis in Macon County. 35% of the black men and women here were infected. But the Public Health Service had underestimated the costs of providing treatment to so many, and they hadn't counted on the Great Depression lasting so long. By the end of 1931, there was not enough money to continue the program. Of the thousands infected, the Public Health Service had treated only 1,400, and of these, many did not receive the full course of therapy. The government doctors pulled out, leaving the men and women here to the mercy of the disease. But this was not to be the end of the Macon County Syphilis Project. Back in Washington, Public Health Service officials were anxious to salvage some scientific benefit from the abandoned program. The head of the VD division, Talifer Clark, had a plan. If there was not enough money for a costly treatment campaign, perhaps there were funds for less expensive research. He proposed Macon County as the ideal site for a 6-month study of untreated syphilis. Clark wrote,
Macon County is a natural laboratory, a ready-made situation. The rather low intelligence of the Negro population, depressed economic conditions, and the very common promiscuous sex relations not only contribute to the spread of syphilis, but also to the prevailing indifference with regard to treatment.
Clark proposed to investigate whether syphilis was the same disease in blacks and in whites. The question emerged from theories that there were fundamental genetic and physical differences between the races.
When you look at many of the medical writings at the turn of the century, especially those of white physicians and nurses and public health experts, the focus is on genetics, that somehow that black people were inherently syphilitic, that black people were inherently tuberculous, that black people had smaller brains, and because they had smaller brains, they couldn't control their lust. They were immoral.
There was also a widely held belief that syphilis in blacks was not a deadly disease. Clark hoped that debunking this would free up new funds for treatment programs. He knew he needed local help to implement his plan, and he turned to Macon County's brightest light, the Tuskegee Institute. Founded by Booker T. Washington to educate freed slaves and their descendants, the school had garnered the trust of the local community and the respect of the nation. Tuskegee was committed to the health needs of blacks and had a well-equipped hospital, laboratories, and a highly trained medical staff, all the facilities needed for a research study. And here was a major research project, an unparalleled scientific opportunity. At least that's the way the designers of the experiment described it. For its part, the school had long depended on the moral support and financial backing of the federal government. So when the Public Health Service came asking for help, it was difficult to say no. In the autumn of 1932, the university agreed to collaborate, and the syphilis treatment program was transformed into a scientific study designed to collect data. And the men of Macon County were changed unwittingly from patients to experimental subjects. No voice was raised in protest. No questions asked about the welfare or the rights of the men.
For the greater part of the 20th century, we assumed that what physicians and scientists were doing was morally responsible and conscientious, and we didn't really ask about it.
Possible death or liberty. This is the risk 10 convicts are volunteering to take in the fight against sleeping sickness.
We're doing this for the sake of humanity.
In the 30s, there were no regulations to ensure that subjects were fully informed about experiments or protected from unnecessary risks. This study was designed to investigate sleeping sickness.
The test begins. In glass tubes with gauze at the ends are mosquitoes which were fed on victims of the St. Louis epidemic. Will their bite affect these men? That is science's question.
Can you feel a mosquito biting?
Yes, ma'am.
Research subjects will most likely come from those who are in some ways not only medically disadvantaged, but socially disadvantaged in one way or another. And therefore, the burden of human experimentation historically has often rested on those who are in some manner least able to protect themselves from this kind of investigation.
In the Macon County experiment, the subjects were found through the two institutions they trusted most, church and school. Herman Shaw heard about a chance to become a special government patient.
The way I heard about it, it was through a rumor that the people, it came out of Macon County, and people said that you could get free medicine for yourself and things of that kind. And they would have a meeting at Salmon Chapel at a certain date. And those of us who were eligible, was of a certain age, well then it had to be a certain age to be eligible to participate in this meeting. Therefore, I went. Well, that's that afternoon when we went over there. But then they said that we'd get free medicine, wouldn't cost us anything, and the doctor would get free doctoring.
The doctors said they had come to cure bad blood.
When it first started up, you see, I didn't know nothing, just a country boy. As they say, when they got down here in Alabama, they found what they wanted. Just went to doctoring on us, and they said he was going to treat us. And they just said bad blood.
Bad blood was a euphemism. It could have meant syphilis. It could have meant tired blood. So that bad blood meant lots of different things. It was not what one would call a very concise term. But the point is, the men were told that they had something wrong with them and that they were being treated for their bad blood.